Are you ready, Jordan?
Hey, what's going on? We're back, baby. Well, we're not back. We're close to being back, but let's scratch that itch a little bit. It's the first, way too early first look NFL strategy show. Glad to have you guys with us, man. I've been waiting way too long for this. Look, we love baseball, but there comes a time where it's like, all right, you get to August, baseball starts to get a little draining. And we're 1 month out from the start of the NFL season in earnest, the start of the main slate. You got the Brazil game, you got the Thursday night game. Dave Loughran, that's Greg Ehrenberg. Way too early first look show for week 1, man. What's up?
Yeah, we've got pricing up on DraftKings. There's a couple milli makers up. Nothing from FanDuel yet. I'm really curious to see what they end up posting. So just going to be covering DraftKings. People will watch this in the future for that reason. There's nothing up on FanDuel at the time of recording, but by popular demand, people have been asking us, can you do a first look NFL show? We're like, yeah, we'll do a first look NFL show because there'll be other first looks coming and no projections or tools up on the site yet, but we'll give you guys a little bit of a preview of some stuff to come. And then we'll give our initial thoughts on what some of the player pricings are and what games we might want to be targeting.
Yep, and we won't hold you too long. I got a haircut in 54 minutes coming up because you and me and Eric and Ben's coming to dinner with us. I convinced him finally, and Josh Engelman, we're going to see Kill Tony at Madison Square Garden. That should be fun on Friday. I can't wait, man.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be a lot of fun. We hang out, gonna go out to dinner. Emax stepping in to host MLB Live Before Lock on Friday, which was something I was a little scared about. I was like, what if we're all going out to dinner? Who's going to be here to do the show? But Emax stepped up on a Friday coming off work, and I'll jump right into that. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. That's no lie, one of the highlights of the summer for me, hanging out with you guys this summer.
Me too, man. People asked what kind of dirt you had on me for getting me to do a Saturday Night Live Before Lock for baseball too. Let's get into it, man. We are on YouTube. We're also streaming live on VX, on formerly known as Twitter. So check that out if that's easier for you. It's actually going from my account right now if you want to jump in. All right, so week 1, you got 12 games on the main slate, right? 12 games on the main slate and a few really high totals. Like if you're looking at this for the first time, okay, first time, and Jordan just pulled it up. Shout out to Jordan producing this one. If you're looking at this for the first time, there are going to be a few spots that jump off the page. Like Baltimore, Kansas City's the Thursday game. Eagles, Green Bay, that's a 48.5 point total. That's Friday in Brazil. Then you got these 12. Then you have what? You have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, okay. So you got the Sunday and the Monday. But Miami, Jacksonville, Houston, Indy, and believe it or not, Buffalo and Arizona. The more I look at some of these teams, the more I think like the loss of these weapons are going to be as consequential as we think. Like I know you lose Stephon Diggs. I know Gabe Davis, the guy, one of the most like unpredictable players from week to week. I look at it, now they just have cheaper weapons for Buffalo, and you still have Josh Allen. You still have James Cook. Dalton Kincaid's probably going to have a monster year. And then on the other side of that game, you have tons of weapons to choose from, albeit, either rookies or guys that have been sketchy in the past. Those 3 games jump off the page, and then the totals drop by like 5 or 6 to every other game.
Yeah, I think one of the things that because we don't know what value is going to open up between now and the start of the season, it stands to reason guys are going to get injured in the preseason. That's going to be some obvious value spots. But I also think it's interesting to look at a team like Buffalo and try to figure out now, what are some of these teams that have lost key players and maybe haven't replaced them, and where some of the target share is going to go, who's going to be getting some of the extra snaps as well, because you brought up something that has been really interesting to me when we were talking about best ball drafts before the show, is there's nobody from the receiving core in Buffalo that I've been like super high on or anything like that as I've done drafts, outside of maybe like Kincaid being somebody who gets taken in, like the 4th or 5th round or something like that. But he's only $5,800 on DraftKings. And you look at the receivers, the most expensive wide receiver in Buffalo, it's Shakur at $5,100. I'm very confident somebody is going to be a really good value from Buffalo. I'm just not sure who it's going to be. It was the same thing at the beginning of last year with the Rams. Remember, we were talking about the Rams receiving core, and it was like, hey, Cooper Kupp is out to start the year. All these guys are super cheap. They're expected to score points. And it was like, one of these guys has to break out. It ended up being Puka Nacua. You look back, though, and I want to say off the top of my head, week 1 last year, Puka Nacua was the min price, $3K, and he was like 0.2% owned in the Millie Maker. There are going to be really crazy opportunities to find.
Every single year you're going to get this, right? We didn't know if it was going to be, what was it? Like Van Jefferson or Tutu Atwell.
Yeah.
Right? And it ended up being Puka Nacua, just monster season. Broke the rookie receiving record, albeit an extra game, but still pretty good stuff. I look at Buffalo and just see opportunity across the board. And, the one guy that's been showing up apparently in camp and, take it with a grain of salt, but Curtis Samuel's been one of those guys that has been, and let's not ignore the fact that this guy has had zero quality quarterbacking. Like, now you're going into a spot where you have Josh Allen throwing you the football, makes a big difference. He had some big games last year as well. Keon Coleman, big question mark there. I don't know what to anticipate from him. Like, if you're going into something and stacking an expensive, for sure, highest priced quarterback on the slate, Josh Allen, that's kind of alleviated when you consider, like, all right, you have Kincaid at 5,800, might end up being their wide receiver 1 in a sense. And then like Curtis Samuel at 4,900, it's still pretty wide open after that. Or you wanted to go to Coleman, you want to go to Shakir. All of those guys are 5,100 or less, 5,800 or less if you're talking Kincaid in the mix.
My gut feeling is going to be that Coleman is going to end up being the most popular, unless we get some, like crazy news that happens.
I think it's going to be Samuel.
So the reason I think it's going, I mean, it could be. The reason I think it's going to be Coleman, though, is because he seems to be somebody who's becoming beloved online for not just because he's putting up a lot of highlights in training camp, which I think is one of the funniest things you see online, where it's like, oh my God, this guy had this crazy catch in a 4-second clip, and all of a sudden they're getting taken like a round or two earlier in best ball drafts because of one highlight from like a 3-second clip. You don't see any of the worst plays anyone makes in training camp. You just see the absolute best highlight. Somebody has, a 6-hour practice, you get a 3-second clip of that 6-hour practice. Like, oh my God, this is the
dude. As an
here.
Eagles fan, Jalen Reagor had the most hyped training camp his second year and ended up being terrible. So you're absolutely right. It means nothing.
It's like the Ben Simmons in the NBA. Every offseason for years, we had Ben Simmons shooting threes in empty gyms. And it was the year. It was going to be the year that Ben Simmons shot threes. And now here we are. Ben Simmons is like nearly out of the league, and it's never anything that ended up happening. But that's one of the reasons I think Coleman is going to end up being the guy, because number one, he's put up a lot of highlights that have been circulated on social media from training camp. Another part of it, too, is he is a really infectious personality. He's super funny in the same kind of way that like Anthony Edwards is, and people seem to be gravitating towards it. So I think his personality combined with some of the highlights and the draft capital that the Bills spent on him, I think he's going to end up being the most popular wide receiver. And the way that I'm going to look at it is actually the same way. The reason I brought up the Rams situation, last year, week 1 was, I think, the second most profitable slate that I had for NFL DFS. I almost won the Millie Maker. My best lineup came like 18th or something in the Millie Maker. Part of it was because there was all these Rams wide receivers that were getting attention, and we didn't know who was going to be the guy. So what I did was I went overweight to the field on Puka Nacua, because I was like, here's an unknown situation. Here's a cheap guy that the field isn't playing. So that's the way I want to approach this one as well, is in between Samuel, Coleman, Shakir. I'm going to want to gravitate towards the one that the field isn't going to be the highest on, and I think that could end up being Shakir.
It's a great call. I think you could probably make that argument for a lot of these teams. Like, you look at Jacksonville, for example. And by the way, with Arizona, you can run it back the Marvin Harrison Jr. route. You could go Trey McBride, who that kid's a stud, and you have double tight end there. I don't know if it'll be popular. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But Trey McBride had a second half of the season that was massive, despite some tough matchups as well after Zach Ertz went down. What about Jacksonville? Like, you have Gabe Davis now. Calvin Ridley's gone. Zay Jones is gone, and he's practicing with the second team right now in that same Arizona squad we were just talking about. There's a decent amount of turnover there. I mean, Christian Kirk is still like the bona fide number one here, But you look at this game against Miami, Greg, both of these teams right now have, 23 plus point implied totals, 26, I think, 26 and a half for Miami, 23 for Jacksonville, 49 point totals, the highest on the slate, only a 3.5 point spread in Miami. Now we just have to worry about the Jags getting heat stroke on the other side of that bench, the way that stadium is designed, but maybe they're used to it. Either way, I think Jacksonville's another one of those teams, not as much clearly as Buffalo. Like, you lose Stephon Diggs, and you lose Gabe Davis. You're technically your ones and twos, but if you're stacking this game and you're going with Loughran stacks, there might be opportunities there too, because they've got a young rookie that they spent decent draft capital on that might get out there and see some decent reps as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident Christian Kirk is going to be the number one guy and the one who
He's gotta
commands
be.
the biggest target share this year. I'm a little unsure between Thomas and Gabe Davis, but I think there's a pretty good chance Gabe Davis just has the same role here that he had in Buffalo, in terms of there's going to be days that it's like, oh my God, Gabe Davis had 5 catches on 6 targets and had like 140 yards and 2 touchdowns. And you'll convince yourself like, oh, Gabe Davis, he's like this can't miss player the next week. And then he gets like 2 targets and doesn't do anything. I think he's going to be a boom bust guy no matter what kind of situation he's in, because he's never going to be the number one guy that demands big target share, but he always has big play potential. So just my initial thoughts looking at this slate, Gabe Davis does look like a really good boom or bust option for tournaments. But Christian Kirk, I think, is probably going to end up being one of the wide receivers that I gravitate towards the most, just overall. First in Jacksonville, Miami stacks, but then also just on the slate, because considering the kind of work I think he's going to get this year, $5,500 does seem like a pretty cheap price point for him.
He's going to get it. I don't see how he doesn't get a ton of work in a spot like this. And I also think, tell me if you see it differently, because, the price of Jalen Waddle is cheap enough to where, do people just go in and start stacking Jalen Waddle with Tyreek Hill, or I'm sorry, stacking Tua with Hill and Waddle, and then rounding out the rest of the lineup, maybe, throwing Kirk or a Brian Thomas or Gabe Davis in on the other side and calling it a day? Because Kirk's $5,500 price point, my opinion, is just flat out wrong for this spot. 49 point total, wide receiver 1, quality quarterback. I don't really see two ways around 5,500 just being too cheap. I'm wondering, do you think the Miami stack is going to be way more popular than Jacksonville, where it's just like a 1 or 2 man run back, where Jacksonville stacks themselves with the Miami run backs aren't as popular? Or do people just go the cheaper route with Jacksonville so they can get Tyreek Hill in easily? Because I think that's possible too.
I think Christian Kirk is going to end up being very, very popular just because he's so apparently mispriced. And but one thing that I think is kind of like a good barometer for looking at some of the initial pricing is also just thinking about it in terms of best ball. Like, you and I have been doing best ball drafts, and you look, for instance, like Christian Kirk is $5,500. Here's who's $100 more expensive than him. Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton gets picked like, I don't know, 60 picks later than Christian Kirk, and he's more expensive. So one other thing that just generally stands out to me about this price range, there are a lot of wide receivers that seem to be very mispriced in this 5K range. So one of the ones that stood out to immediately to me was Christian Kirk. Another one who's priced the same of him is Tank Dell, assuming that he's healthy and doesn't have any restrictions or anything to start the season. And then the other one is Neighbors from the Giants at $5,900.
Yeah, that spot against Minnesota is an interesting one. I mean, you look at some of the pricing here. I'll throw another one at you. I don't think you mentioned them, because you mentioned what, Dell, Kirk, Malik Neighbors, and who else?
Those were the 3 that I said right there.
What about George Pickens? Zero quarterbacking last year, so we can make all the arguments we want about like Russ is washed, or who knows, maybe it ends up being Fields. That's still undecided. You're talking about a 1,200 yard season from George Pickens, and some absolute ceiling games from this guy, right? Like, look at some of his long receptions in these games, 71, 86. He can break them loose. Had a few massive games to close out the year, 7 for 131, 6 for 195 and 2 scores. Earlier in the year, 6 on 10 targets for 130 and a score, 5 for 107, 4 for 127 and a touchdown. Pickens has those ceiling games in him for sure. Now Deontay Johnson's gone. You want to go further with that? I think this price point's flat out wrong. And I know Atlanta improved their defense. I know they improved their secondary. I'm not taking that away from them. They are favorites in this game. I know Pittsburgh only has a 20.5-point total, but Roman Wilson, and credit to the Steelers, they draft pretty good receivers a lot of the time. This guy's week to week with a sprained ankle. He's going to miss a lot of training camp. He's a rookie. Who else do they have? Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins? It might just end up, and Pat Freiermuth, sure.
Yeah.
It might just end up being a spot where where George Pickens gets peppered with targets, and all he needs is one to break loose. 5,700 to me. I like this. Also, if they're playing from behind, you got plenty of weapons in Atlanta now. I just think like Pickens makes for such a sick run back in Atlanta stacks.
Yeah, I mean, this 5K range really does seem to me to be the best points per dollar options overall on the slate. Lots of rumors online at the time we're doing this that Brandon Ayuk is going to be traded to the Steelers, but it's just nonsense rumors. It could end up happening, but I don't think anything is all that close, despite what some rumors might be online on Twitter about it. Something else as well about Pickens is, for all the talk about like what's going to happen with the quarterback play for the Steelers, it can't be worse than last year. It's going to be like neutral at worst. Exactly. It was terrible last year.
Right. It could be terrible, and still Pickens had a 1,200-yard season, 11-9, 1,200-yard season, 5 scores with awful. I mean, they had what, bottom 5, 6, 7 quarterbacking in the whole league last year, and he still got there with Deontay Johnson on the field. Seems like a good spot. Honestly, the 5K range in general looks good. And Deontay Johnson against New Orleans, you know what's going to happen. Bryce Young's, I don't actually think this is going to happen, but like one of these guys, Greg, one of these quarterbacks that just has been known to just outright stink, horrible year last year, is just going to completely turn things around, get exhumed from the grave. And it's going to be like a Deontay Johnson massive game or something like that. I just don't know. I don't know how I get there is the problem. I'd rather almost look towards a Joshua Palmer. I don't know what's going on with Ladd McConkey either. If he plays at 4,700 and he's fine because he's dealing with an injury, I know it's going to be a run heavy offense with Greg Roman, but I'm a believer in Harbaugh. Like, that guy wins wherever the hell he goes. Wherever he goes, that guy seems to win. Take some pressure, alleviate some pressure off Herbert, run the ball more, balance the offense out. I don't have an issue with that. I have no faith in this Vegas Raiders defense. And the Chargers have one of the higher totals on the slate. The question mark here, though, is like Ladd McConkey, injury history, injured right now. We don't know what it is. And then the plantar fasciitis for Herbert. He's a warrior. I think he'll play through anything. But, what do you do with super cheap pass catchers for the Chargers in a game like that?
Yeah, so for the year, like, my best guess is I think Joshua Palmer ends up being the number 1 wide receiver for them, and he's somebody who they really lean on. However,
I think it's McConkey.
Oh, yeah, I mean, he also, just referencing best ball, like, he does get drafted quite a bit earlier than Palmer, so that is definitely the way that the field is seeing it overall. I don't think that's going to be the case for week 1, though. Long-term for the season, I do think by the time we're at the end of the year, I think McConkey is the best bet to be the number 1 wide receiver. But to open up the year, particularly with what you had said, McConkey right now being a little bit banged up, and right now we have like no information on what's going on with him. We're recording this on August 6th. For anybody who's watching this in the future, McConkey left training camp, I think it was yesterday, with an undisclosed injury. We haven't gotten any updates since then. If he has to miss any time, though, in the preseason or practices leading up to the start of the year, with him being a rookie, it just kind of seems to me to be most common sense that the Chargers just lean more on Joshua Palmer in that kind of situation. However, I also think that there's a pretty good argument to be made for a bounce back for Quentin Johnston, which, if I end up playing Quentin Johnston in week 1 of the NFL season, he comes to Birmingham, I'm going to feel like the biggest moron ever, because the amount of times that I chased him last year and it never worked out, where it was even to open the year, I remember thinking him as like a pretty good boom bust type option for the Chargers. and is somebody who could have big play potential behind Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And that didn't end up being the case. And then what happens? Mike Williams gets hurt, and I go, oh my God, it's Quentin Johnston time. Got to start playing Quentin Johnston. It doesn't work out. He isn't the guy. And then when Keenan Allen gets hurt at one point, and then you go, oh, now for sure it has to be Quentin Johnston.
And
it
Palmer
wasn't
got
him
hurt
that
too.
time either.
Palmer got hurt too. Palmer missed like 6 or 7 games.
There were so many times that I played Quentin Johnston thinking for sure it was going to be his time. And I wasn't alone in that. A lot of the field did that as well. I remember there was a showdown slate where he was super popular. I think it might have been the week after, or maybe like 2 weeks after Palmer got hurt. But he now is going to be going into his second year. They used draft capital on him last year. If we do see McConkey have to miss time leading up to the start of the season, then we could see Quentin Johnston have a breakout that a lot of people expected him to have last year. Maybe he has it this year and it goes under the radar with people not looking to target him.
Following your lead from what you mentioned a minute ago, because this is oftentimes how I'm doing best ball drafts as well. Like I'm looking for teams where there's a lot of uncertainty and trying to pluck some guys in like the super late rounds of the draft. Tank Dell's a good example. Last year, there was a lot of uncertainty there. Nico Collins, yeah, we think he's going to be good. No one knew he was going to be this good. And then who else? Noah Brown. There was just a lot. Robert Woods was washed. And then Tank Dell, up until the start of the preseason, was going in the 20th round of DraftKings best ball draft, like the last round.
Yeah. And Nico Collins was like 15th round or something like that, or 14th
exactly.
round.
Yeah, they were all late. And I think there's opportunity in DFS in the early weeks too. Miami's pretty obvious, but who knows? You might get a Jonnu Smith game or something. I think he's perfectly reasonable. And you're getting him at what? $3,500 if you're looking to add him as a piece of a stack, because Durham Smythe, they haven't had a quality pass catching back in a while. Gesicki didn't work out for them. Like, are there other teams where we don't know that have, maybe decent? I think Indy outside of Pittman could be one of them.
To me, the biggest thing about this as we're talking through it is there's all these opportunities at wide receiver. And my first thought is I'm going to be spending up at running back and then saving more money at wide receiver because of the amount of guys that look like the really good points per dollar plays in the 5K range, maybe some low owned upside targets that we could take chances on in the 4K range. There are so many timeshare situations at running back this year that are going to be really difficult to navigate. So I think that the way it's going to be most sensible to build lineups and create upside is maybe roster a little bit more of like Jonathan Taylor or Bijan Robinson or something like that. And then roster more of these 5K wide receivers. Because then if I look at running backs, which we haven't really talked a whole lot about so far, their spot, like I have no clue what to do with like Achane and Mostert, for instance. Like they're both expensive. Some of these situations are going to be really difficult to figure out at running back.
Let's get into running back then. Because I've got somebody. Now, you're right. Paying Jonathan Taylor, coming back, should be healthy. Bijan Robinson against Pittsburgh. Still, what is Tyler Algier's workload going to be like? This is still up in the air. Don't get me wrong. I think Bijan's going to be solid. Etienne's $7,200. There's really no competition in that backfield. It sounds like Tank Bigsby still isn't good. James Cook against Arizona looks solid. There is one guy though. I'm a truther here. Like I've been a truther on this guy for too many years. Can you guess? I know you and I don't do a ton of NFL shows. I know Ben would be able to guess this, but there's one guy in that 6K range that I will come back to every single season. I bet chat knows as well.
All right, let me look. So the 6K range.
Yeah, like between the 6 and 7. So.
All right. I'm going to guess it's closer to the 6K range. Can you give me like a little, I think I know who it is, but.
Well, take a guess and then I'll tell you.
Okay. Is it Austin Eckler?
No, but he is on a new team.
Okay. So if it's not Austin Eckler, then Swift?
Aaron Jones.
Okay. I was not going to have guessed him.
I think Aaron Jones, Chris got it. I think Aaron Jones, if he stays healthy, could have a really significant season. He's a phenomenal pass catcher. Jack got it as well. He's an excellent pass catcher. He had a huge end to the season once he came back and finally got healthy. And then to top it off, you have Kevin O'Connell, who's boldly proclaimed, I don't want to be a team that has to pass 70% of the time. He wants to run the football. Alexander Madison had a terror. You remember, I tried going to Madison last year. Terrible every single time. And if it wasn't him picking up -1 yards per carry, it was him fumbling inside the 10-yard line. I mean, time in and time out. I know you remember Aaron Jones. People act like he has nothing left. He had 100+ rushing yards in each of the last 5 weeks of the season. 2 of them were in the playoffs against Dallas and the San Francisco 49ers. And he did so with good volume, 20+ carries, and all but one of them he had 18. He's a good pass catching back as well. We've seen that. Remember first week of the season, 4 for 86 and a touchdown against Chicago in that primetime game, and then he got hurt. I don't know. I'm probably on an island here, but I'm not giving up on Aaron Jones yet. And this is a spot where Minnesota, despite no longer having Kirk Cousins, is still a slight favorite on the road against the New York Giants. I just think the volume, particularly without Cousins, now that you have Darnold likely, I think he's going to be super involved and also see plenty of opportunities catching the ball out of the backfield.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that just kind of gives me a little bit of hesitation with Jones, I'm not positive the workload is going to be there. And I do think that there's guys priced around him that could be in better situations that are going to have comparable or potentially even more workload. Like for me, Joe Mixon at $6,600 in that matchup against the Colts. There are so many good offensive weapons on the Texans. So I do think the ball is going to be spread out a good amount through the air. But once they get into the red zone, I think Joe Mixon's going to get a lot of scoring opportunities this year. One thing that has been, I haven't looked at a lot of the NFL futures odds this year, but one thing I'm interested to look up is what the odds are for Joe Mixon to lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns, just because I think he's going to get so many opportunities. So to me, like Aaron Jones, I do think there's an upside there, but I think Joe Mixon's the guy I'm going to like the most priced around him.
Okay. For me, it comes down more to, and I don't think you're wrong in that analysis, but it comes down to, and you already mentioned it, how many weapons are on that team? Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, Dalton Schultz. I think Mixon could still be good, but if he's not the outright bell cow, then that could be thing. He's, by the way, he's 25 to 1. And he's 25 to 1 to have the most regular season rushing touchdowns.
Who's the leader?
He's 17th. It's Christian McCaffrey, and then Derrick Henry.
Yeah, makes sense.
By a mile.
What are the odds on McCaffrey?
6 to 1.
That's such a dumb bet at those kind of odds. Just because it's funny, some of the narratives on players. Like last year, people don't want to take Christian McCaffrey all that early in draft because, like, oh, he's inevitably going to get hurt, and then he just stays healthy for one season. People are like, hey, there's no injury risk with Christian McCaffrey. Like 6 to 1 to lead the end. Not like if I had to tell you who's most likely to do it, it is McCaffrey, but the odds are just ridiculous. Terrible.
And look, Joe Mixon has a higher rushing prop than Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is sitting at 750, 700 on FanDuel, by the way, but on DraftKings 750. I just think he's the type of guy that can contribute in a lot of ways, and I think they're going to need to use him. Also, is Addison getting suspended?
I don't know. So there's a couple of ones like
you see my lights flickering.
So it's pouring by me, and I don't know if the power's going to go out later, but I assume it's probably the same by you also.
Yeah, my lights just started flickering like crazy. Anyway, go
ahead. So the other thing I was going to say about, so Addison and then also Rashee Rice. I would assume both of them are like they've clearly both done something wrong here. Like that's not even up for debate at this point. I just don't know, is the punishment going to be this year at the start of the season, later in the season, does it get pushed back to next season? Because that's what ended up happening with Kamara last year. If you remember, it was very heavily speculated that he was going to end up getting suspended for, I don't even remember what year it is now, but for the 2 seasons ago. And then it didn't end up being the case. Then he had to serve a suspension last year. So considering we haven't heard any news yet, my assumption is going to be that they both get suspended, but not for week 1 of the season.
Agreed. Also, I just looked, Addison's hearing is October 7th. So that, I think that tells us enough, at least early in the year. By the way, shout out to you guys watching on X right now. We got 280 concurrent with us, Greg. First time I've broadcast anything from the X handle. Not bad for a month out first look strategy show.
Yeah, the very very we should have added more things, like the very very first look.
Yeah, the Genesis first look strategy
Yeah.
show. Also, I can throw this link in there if you guys are betting the NFL this year. I'm in PA, so I'm excited about this. So forgive me, but because I already took advantage of it. Bet365 is in like 11 or 12 states now. When it started last year, it was in 4, I think. Now they're in 11 or 12. Pennsylvania just started. It's you bet 5, you get 150 in bonus bets, plus you get 50 casino spins. I went in and I was like, let me bet my 5 and get my casino spins and my bonus. Craig, I went in and I was like, screw it. It was night. I was laying in bed. I may have had a drink or two. And it was I was like, let me bet a live plate appearance. So I bet Luis Robert to double or triple at 18-1, and it hit. So I got paid out nice on that. I got the bonus bets, but I threw the link in for you guys over on X. If you wanted to check that out, you probably have to copy paste it, but same with you guys on Twitter. $150 in bonus bets. Just bet 5, deposit 10, bet 5 on whatever you want. Once it settles, instantly deposit into your account. So yeah, good stuff, man. Get every bonus, get every single bonus you can going into the NFL season, because with NFL, these sites do things big and then they just stop. Like it'll stop up until what? The start of, I don't even know.
We never know either. It's all of a sudden we get an email. It's like done now. It's the promo ended
that morning
ends in 30 minutes. Like we don't know either.
All right, can I throw some potential value running backs at you and get your thoughts?
Yeah.
There's not a ton here, but what do you make of a Chase Brown? And this is a timeshare, but we know who Zach Moss is. Zach Moss could just end up having a huge game. They're going up against the Patriots. They're, I believe, the biggest favorites on the slate. Cincinnati has a implied total of, what is it? Because New England's at 17. Cincinnati's at 26. What do you think about that Cincy backfield? 2 sub 6K running backs.
Yeah, one thing that was really weird to me about when they moved on from Joe Mixon, they brought in Zach Moss, is I view Moss and Brown as being pretty similar sorts of backs. Like I thought that there would be Chase Brown is like the third down and the pass catching back, and they complement him with somebody who's going to be like the goal line back and somebody's going to carry the ball on like first downs. But I find it really difficult to know what they're going to do, because unless you disagree, like I really think that Moss and Brown are very similar sort of archetype, and Moss has been used in the past in the same sort of way that Brown has been used in the past. Now, with that said, Zach Moss was outstanding last year when Jonathan Taylor was out. Maybe Cincinnati saw that and they thought like, hey, this is a guy who can carry more of a bell cow sort of role. So we are starting to see a lot of hype just in general about Brown. And I think this was brought up initially because it was one of the Bengals offensive linemen had said that if he was drafting a fantasy team, he would draft Brown first overall. I think that was the story that kind of started to build up some of the hype, which kind of had people thinking like, oh, that must mean he's going to be the number one guy.
It's so stupid.
I think that Zach Moss is still going to have more snaps and get more touches than Brown does, but I don't know that for sure. And at 5K, I definitely think there's potential for some upside there, particularly like what you said. Cincinnati's going to be a really big favorite. It's going to be a situation that sets up well for them to be running the ball in the fourth quarter. And we just don't know between Moss and Brown who's going to be the guy. And that's one of the issues with running back and why I think I'm more apt to spend up at the position for week 1. I know where there's value at wide receiver. There's guys I have no doubt about that are going to be top wide receivers on their team. Running back's a mess. There are so many viable running backs that are in timeshares, like the Cincinnati situation, the Dallas situation, the Tennessee situation. And I don't really know what to do with a lot of these spots, but when it's in doubt, it probably does make more sense just to go to the cheaper guy.
Yes. I also don't know if Zach Moss was just getting a lot of work to where he was fine. You know, he was among all running backs with 150 plus attempts. He had 2.7 yards per contact after attempt. That's 23rd out of 35. Um, just looking at some of these, 4.3 yards per attempt, was 13th. Not bad. The more you look at it though, even if so, if I had to guess, I think that Zach Moss ends up being early in the season, at least. I do think it ends up being out there first and second downs. I don't think it's crazy to think he gets a little bit of passing work either, but forget about all the hype around Chase Brown from, random reports. $5,800 on Zach Moss as a 9-point favorite against the Patriots team that likely won't have a functional offense. He's first of all, he's going to be popular. Do you agree? I have a hard time believing Zach Moss isn't one of the chalkier running backs on this slate as a 9-point home favorite against the Pats.
It remains to be seen because, I've done a lot of best ball drafts recently where Chase Brown gets drafted ahead of Zach Moss now. So the public sentiment might be, unless we definitively hear that Moss is the number one guy, I think the field might gravitate more towards Brown, but I'm not totally sure.
Yeah. We'll see.
I do have one question for you because I'm kind of scrolling through the running back pricing. Who is the cheapest running back that you are very confident gets a big workload to open up the season?
Great question. All right. I thought you were going to say cheapest that I'll play, but you're saying cheapest that I'm that I'm confident will get a workload.
Yes. Significant workload.
All right. Let's see here. Let me sort these guys. Well, assuming Nick Chubb isn't back, I would think Jerome Ford, unless you think Dante Foreman gets a lot of work. Yeah, Chuba Hubbard, I guess. Probably Devin Singletary. Unless I've been drafting a lot of Tyrone Tracy Jr. late in drafts, but that doesn't mean I'm confident early on. I think Devin Singletary is probably the guy, just given, they got rid of Saquon Barkley. Singletary just signed 3 years, $16 million. I think he probably gets a lot of work, at least early on in the early goings of this season. Do you have anyone, unless you want to say Zamir White, but you have Madison, you have a rookie that could get work in the passing game there. So I'm not confident there either.
So my answer, you actually did say it right at the start, and that is Chuba Hubbard. Because if you look at the situation in Carolina's backfield, Jonathan Brooks is out, and he's not expected to play until week 3 or week 4 of the season or something like that, based on what we've seen so far. So I'm going to say Brooks not in the picture. In addition to that, Rashad Penny retired. So now you're in a situation where, all right, they're kind of thin on depth. Because they use draft capital on Brooks, I don't think they're going to go out and sign somebody else. I think they're just content to be kind of shorthanded the first couple of weeks of the season. And at the end of the year last year, Hubbard was very clearly elevated above Miles Sanders in the pecking order there. I think this is a very similar situation for Hubbard to open the season as it was to end last year. And he was sneaky pretty good for DFS purposes at the end of the year. He was involved in the passing game. He would get a few targets per game. He was getting goal line touches. So at $5,300, I think it's a pretty decent value spot relative to other cheaper running backs. And then in addition to that as well, I don't think the most likely scenario is that Bryce Young is going to be good this year. He was historically bad for his first season. I think he's going to be better this year than he was last year. And he's definitely somebody who could have a big bounce back. There's a reason he was the number 1 overall pick in the draft last year. It doesn't mean he has to be good, but it means that there's talent there. So I think the Panthers offense should at the bare minimum be slightly better this year than it was last year. And also when you look at just that workload that Hubbard had last year, they brought Deontay Johnson, and that should help them move the ball a little bit as well. Hubbard's the one that looks like the best value running back to me right now.
I don't disagree. 5,300. We saw a massive workload late in the season. Miles Sanders, anyone who didn't see that coming is crazy. Coming from arguably the best offensive line in football and then getting stuck there. He was okay. He wasn't great. as a running back in general. Are there any? God, you're right. There's a lot of committees.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. Who knows what to make at this point between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet? I don't know what to make there. I probably just stay away from that backfield, at least in week one. I think James Conner's probably still safe early on. I do expect Trey Benson to start getting work. You know, that would be my guess. And that starts, I'm not saying 50-50 split, but he starts getting more. You know, I have some concerns about is Rachaad White. I think Bucky Irving probably gets integrated into this offense quicker than people think. And while Rachaad White was great to us last year, to many of us who were hitting him early in the season, it's not like he was a super efficient runner. He got a lot done in the passing game, gave us a lot of, look, he gave us some great games, but he is the one guy that I have some real reservations about. Man. He averaged 3.6 yards per carry last year. Again, that's what, 30th out of 35 running backs with 150 attempts last year. I'm just using it. Yards after contact per attempt. He was 31st out of 35. There's a lot of things to me when I look at Rachaad White. I go, oh, okay. I don't know how I feel about that. Aside from the fact that he did a lot in the passing game, 466 receiving yards, 75 receptions, 4 touchdowns. That's the type of production that can go a long way. But if he's not getting it done there, I don't think he's getting enough done on the ground.
Yeah. He's also $6,300, so he's kind of expensive. What did he finish? Yeah, he got up to $7,600 last year. So maybe with that in mind, the $6,300 price tag isn't all that bad. But I agree with you. His workload could only go down. I remember we're like halfway through the season last year, and it was running backs that had the largest snap share on the team. Number 1 was McCaffrey. Number 2 was Rachaad White at that point. Like, he had a massive workload. That could only go down. And the reason that you bring in somebody like Bucky Irving, and it's not like this is somebody they used a first round pick on or anything like that. But in 2024, when you pick somebody in the 4th round as a running back, it is with the intention of giving them some sort of workload pretty early on in their career. So I agree with you. I think he's going to cut into the workload of Rachaad White. So he's another one at $6,300. Like, if you just go through, if you pull up DraftKings and when you're building your lineup, you look at the team depth charts, it's kind of interesting just to look at all these individual teams, and you really quickly find out, like, oh my God, like 90% of the teams this year have a committee at running back this year. And it is so difficult to figure out who is going to be the guy on any given week. I think this could be a season where we really start to prioritize who the goal line backs are in the NFL, because it might be hard to know who's going to be getting the most touches on a given week. But I do think who gets the touches at the 1 yard line will be a little bit more predictive.
Any other stacks, any other players you want to talk about? Of course, this is the first look show. And hey, you talked about building lineups. For those of you guys that watch all of our MLB shows, we just released the single lineup simulator, which is just awesome. Jordan, if you still have the old lineup, Josh and I built one today. So you build your lineup. So if you're a hand builder, and I love hand building NFL lineups specifically, I absolutely love it for single entry, those huge 3-max, the spy, the red zone, the fair catch, all of those, right? You build it, and we're going to have this for NFL for week 1. You build it. Go, Jordan, do we not have another lineup? We had the 74% simmed lineup. That's okay. Don't worry about it. You build it. Just remove a guy, Jordan, and then add another guy so we can sim it. And then you sim it. So like the sims you've heard about that we've had for a year or so now. For baseball, we had it. For football, someone took down the 2 people took down the millie with it, Steve and Short Gamer TV. Now we're going to have the single lineup sim, and you're not going to have to pay the cost that you would pay to get for the big sim, where it's, 100, if you're playing 150 or whatever that may be. This is giving you instant feedback on every lineup that you run, because we're simming it against the field that we've generated. I'm just really excited about this tool, man.
Yeah, I mean, there's only so much that I could say right now about some of the stuff we're releasing for a handful of reasons. But I'll let you guys know that one of our goals going into football season this year is we're going to have new packages on the site. We're going to have new tools. And the idea around a lot of this is going to make sure that we offer the best stuff of any of the other sites that are in this space, while also now being at price points that we're hoping end up being cheaper than other sites as well.
Can't wait. It's going to be so fun to build these out on the Sim Strategy Show with you on Fridays.
Got all kinds of new stuff coming. Yeah, this is really fun. If you guys, like Lofty said, we've been featuring it a lot on baseball shows this week because we have baseball sale that's going on as well, and it's brand new. But for football, there's going to be a lot of new stuff coming that you guys will be excited about it.
Any other spots we want to touch on here?
We didn't really touch on tight ends at all. Just kind of curious, was there anybody at the first glance of the tight end position that really stood out to you? Because there's one guy I uncomfortably like.
The reason I don't dig in too much is because they usually just become stack pieces for me. I'm a Jelani Woods truther, and I'll always go back to the well on that guy. Probably not in week one. I think a cheap option, Jonnu Smith in that game is viable. You know, God, I don't know. Schultz is up there. I like Kincaid. I like McBride. Great scoring atmosphere. I love Evan Ingram in that game, especially now that Calvin Ridley and Gabe Davis are gone. Who are you looking? Or I'm sorry, Gabe Davis is there. Zay Jones and Calvin Ridley are gone. Who are you looking at?
Kyle Pitts at $4,600. Just new coaches in Atlanta, new quarterback as well. The talent has always been there for Kyle Pitts. There's a reason why he's always been a polarizing fantasy football figure. And I think a lot of the reasons that he struggled did have to do with reasons that were outside of him. Bad quarterback play. The coaching has always been questionable with some of the decision making and who gets touches at what points in games and what parts of the field and whatnot. I think Kyle Pitts can only benefit from the changes that have happened on that team. And at the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if we look back and go, how is Kyle Pitts $4,600 in week one?
I totally agree. Yeah, of course. I think these these Atlanta stacks will be relatively popular too. Because I don't know if you've seen, but Drake London's price point is sitting at 50 or 6K flat. You have Pitts and then Cousins is 61. It's not an expensive stack. I look at some of these other stacks and I look at some of the totals. I mean, I don't love the Carolina New Orleans stack. There's always one that pops off when you least expect it. I don't think it's likely to be Seattle, Denver. I also think that Denver defense was, really, I think that Denver defense is a lot better than they looked earlier in the season. I mean, I said it all year, ended up being right about that objectively, that they were terrible and everyone wrote them off against Miami. And then I just started betting the under every week because they can't be that bad. And they weren't. But like Chargers Raiders is interesting. Chargers defense could struggle this year, but quarterbacking, who knows? The good pass catchers, Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, Zamir Smith, who knows what that backfield's going to look like. I'll leave you guys with this, a question for Greg. And thanks for watching because I've been itching to do this show and I know you have too. Do you think there's shootout potential between Cleveland and Dallas, even though it's a 44-point total and Dallas only has a 21-point team total in this one? They have the weapons.
To an extent there is, but Dallas is a good defense and Deshaun Watson has not looked good in a meaningful amount of time. So a lot of it is going to depend. And Deshaun Watson, I know he got hurt last year. He sucked when he was healthy though also. That's the biggest issue for me is expecting a shootout in a game with Cleveland is Deshaun Watson going to be any good this year?
That is an issue. That is an issue. Anyway, this is fun, man. We'll be back. We'll be doing this like 5 times. Not this specific show, of course, but we'll be doing this a lot, 4 or 5 times a week on the Stochastic YouTube channel. If you're watching on Twitter, hit us up on YouTube, STOKASTIC, Stochastic DFS. That's where you'll find everything from football, basketball, baseball, golf, all of it over there. So if you just stumbled across this on X, then you know where to find us. Follow Greg at Ehrenberg DFS. If you're watching on X, you probably follow me already, so I don't need to say much about that. But yeah, stochastic.com. Check out the tools. I hope you guys are excited for some of these new tools and packages as we are. It's going to be an awesome season. Can't wait to hang out with you guys for the next, 20 plus weeks or whatever it'll be. So until then, enjoy your baseball and your Olympics, and we'll see you back here for week 1 on the First Look Strategy Show. Peace.